Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the final closing plenary. What a few days we've had, Sarah Jane.
It's been fabulous. Oh, it's been fabulous. I cannot keep that up.
No, you can let that go. Let that go.
Look, I need to start with an apology to all of my fans out there who requested that I keep the dress on. I'm sorry, but you've been well and truly outnumbered by those people who are begging me to get the thing off in the nicest possible way.
You're looking very, very glamorous. So now what you've all been waiting for, the panel that you've chosen, the questions that you voted on, we would like to welcome to the stage...
Oh, sorry.
Woo! Dr. Stephen Barnett, the GP Supervisor, Principal ME and Medical Director of Medcast. Woo! Okay, we'll have to come back to him. So, we're calling on Dr. Graham Emblem, the Deputy Director and ME of Medical Education at GPTQ. We'd like to welcome down Dr. Melanie Smith, the RLO from GPX. Come on down, Melanie! Woo! She looks so shocked. You chose them. Let's keep going. And we've got Alison Warrington, the CEO of GPTT, Chair of Arton. Come on down. We have Dr. Paul Grinsky, the ME from MCCC, looking really surprised. Woo, give him a round of applause. Woo. Okay, and last but not least, we have Nigel Gray, the Director of Training at NTGPE. Come on down. Now, if anyone happens to see Stephen Barnett, tell him he's late. No, we'd just like to open up. Thank you all our panellists for being... We just want to say thank you to all our panellists for coming up at such short notice. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to hand over to our lovely questionnaire people who've decided to come up with some good things to ask our panellists. So we'll just start off with number one. Fire away.
Hello, thanks everybody. Vanessa from GP Synergy. I would like to know, what do you guys see, you future, as the GP's role with the emerging technologies that we've been hearing about, the Wilsons and apps and all that kind of stuff?
So I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. And then there's a mic. Go for it.
The problem it's sitting next to you. We're generalists. I think we've got a real advantage in what we already do. We deal with uncertainty, we deal with change. Every consult is different. We're used to flux. And so this is just more flux. I don't think it's much, it's a different form, but I don't think it's that challenging really when you look at the big picture. So I think it's incorporating things that we know can work, throwing out the stuff like Bastian tweeted yesterday. There are certain apps that have been shown not to work. They look shiny, but they don't actually do it. So that'll be synthesised for us and with us. But I think incorporating into a practice will be just part of what we do with other tools that we've developed along the way. Part of it will be probably divulging some of our duties to apps, blood pressure measurement, for example. So we just free up more of our consultation time to deal with the patient and actually do what we do best, which is actually that one-to-one, face-to-face, person-to-person interaction rather than the technology and other stuff which can be handballed to something else. So I'm not so worried about it. We've got to be cautious of how we use it and how quickly and how we integrate those things, but I think it's just part of what we do. And I think as a profession, we're at the forefront of being able to do that because we already do those things in our practice anyway, just in a different format.
Thank you, Paul.
I think it's a core part of our role, and yes, we're going to have to do it. I already do prescribe apps, so I'm pleased to see that that's something that's even going to grow further. I think if you think about rational prescribing, and our job is to help people understand what's valuable and what's not valuable. And I think in the same way with a lot of this digital technology, what's going to be valuable, what's not going to be valuable, which is safe, which is appropriate, which is the rip-offs. And That's where we as a profession can get advice through various groups. The colleges can support us in this role, but we're the ones there that can help the individual find what's going to work for them.
I should, yes, it is on. I'd certainly like to echo the words of my learned colleagues. I think our role as general practitioners is very much around the issue of person-to-person interaction and actually moderating to some extent the potential risk of relying too much on resources that perhaps aren't as validated or aren't as patient-friendly as they could be. As you can probably tell a little bit from our ramblings up in Darwin, we're not particularly techno-savvy. And my major learning outcome from the conference in the last 2 days that I've met is, courtesy of a colleague, medical educator of mine, is how to operate the automatic paper towel dispenser in the gents' toilets. It took me 36 hours to work that one out.
Thank you.
I think as GPs, our critical role as clinicians is probably to use these data collecting apps and actually decide what data is worth collecting and what we're going to do with it. There's a lot of data out there that's probably noise and data for data's sake, but the real art is in knowing what to look at and what to do with it.
Thank you very much. Graham, do you want to finish?
Just one last comment. I'm looking forward when I can have my hologram sitting in the consulting room while I'm sitting on the beach doing the consulting as well.
The possibilities, hey? It's mind-blowing. Right, we might take it to our second question. Fire away, Sarah Jane.
Thank you. I've exercised my prerogative and power to ask not only a question, but a John Buckley question. I'd be really keen to hear from each of the panellists. How will you be different next week from having been at GP Tech this week?
So the question was, how are you going to be different next week from being here?
I'll go first again, just
Thanks,
because I did
Paul.
first time last time. Despite GP Tech and all the futurism and the tech, one of the things I've got out of going to conferences, again, going back to people, just the networking. And for me, next week, rather than looking up a new app or trying more Twitter or something like that, which I don't think is going to be necessarily a big change for me it's going to be the ability to phone or tweet or email or whatever form someone across the nation as if in the room next door because you're here. And probably via the app, via the Hoover app, I can just look up your details and give you a message. But I think just the fact that we are, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but we're a family to some extent. And there's familiarity in just being here, even if I haven't spoken to you. I know you've experienced the same conference, and I can then say, did you go to that conference or that session? I saw you check in, what was it like? That sort of thing. I think that's more likely my take home, that I've got a bigger network, and that network is facilitated by technology, but the face-to-face is the reason I'm here, not the technology itself.
Thanks, Paul.
Next week, I've been inspired to start work on my first Pecha Kucha talk to give to my fellow RLOs or registrars back at GPs.
I think from our perspective at GBTT, and it's not necessarily, picking things and saying I'm going to do this differently next week because of what we learnt last week. What we will be doing as a team, as we usually do, is we'll sit down and reflect on what we've actually learned, share with those that are actually not here what has been learnt, and then decide realistically what is it that we can do with the resources and the time that we have that can better make us more efficient to continue to deliver our quality training. So we can't bite it off in one go, but we'll certainly be realistic about what's going to be useful for us in the short term.
I think that's a really important principle, is being able to distill down 1 or 2 points that have been critical for you and then disseminate that. We are not a closed group here, and we've got so many of our friends and colleagues who can't make it. So sharing that, I think that's vital and reflecting.
I'll learn to turn microphones on for one. For me, the networking, the relationships, I reflect on Christina Hearn's comment earlier in the year that this is my tribe, and knowing that I'm not doing this job by myself and I have my own team, but this is a much broader team, helps to encourage me. I did learn a bit about hacking this morning, and I learnt to do some self-psychoanalysis, so I'll probably have to do a bit of that next week, but I'll need some help.
Thanks. Hacking. Go for it.
I actually feel very invigorated from being here the last 2 days. In the role that I have, as many of you have, there can be times when the demands and the travel and everything else can be quite wearing. But I actually feel really, as I say, invigorated from being here the last couple of days, and that's because, as Paul and Graham and Alison have said, it's being amongst like-minded colleagues, and I've been very proud the last 2 days to see a number of our educators from the Territory, and no apologies for that. I think they've done an excellent job in the presentations that they've put forward, but what that has done has then allowed for the introduction of other ideas and the sharing of ideas and innovation. So I actually feel maybe we haven't got enough time left after all to put everything into place that we've learnt this week. So invigorated is how I feel.
Thank you so much. So we might move to question number 3, and we will have some time for just general audience questions. So given the expertise on this panel, please if you think of something that you'd really love to ask, have a think about that. So question number 3.
Oh, hi, James Aiken. I'm a supervisor with Synergy. The last few days we've been talking a lot about the future, and obviously with GP training there's been a lot of changes in the last few years. I was just interested in what the panel thought, what will GP training look like in 5 years' time?
It's a hard one. Have a think about it.
Well, we've had a futurist yesterday, and if we follow his line, then we'll be really not sure. I think that there's so many uncertainties as to where we're going over the next 5 years. I believe that it'll still be the apprenticeship model. I don't believe that general practice can be learnt out of a book or from online modules or from a university course. I still think that the cornerstone of experience within a general practice with a supervisor is going to be critical for the future of GP training, and I would hope that that never disappears. The structures that support that, what I don't know. We've seen major change this time. There are rumours around of whole different systems of funding and support networks, and to some extent they're at the whim of the government and the colleges. I'm hopeful that, as those that would be aware from last night, that the aiming group has chosen to become incorporated, and so as an entity, that we will have a voice in that design of what actually happens, so that it is an educationally sound process for that generation of the doctors that are coming through. Whether it's user pays, whether it is funded for those that are in need, I'm not sure, and I don't know whether there's benefits with different models, but I still believe the cornerstone will stay the same.
Thanks, Graham.
I think I'd support that, Graham. But I do think that we also, whilst to some extent we're influenced by college and funders, I think we do have the opportunity as the technical experts. We're the guys that have been doing it for a long time, I believe, and I think we need to make it clear, provide a clear voice that actually the way that it's done currently with the apprenticeship model, using educators, using supervisors, using cultural educators and other staff has been successful. And I would hope that, yes, there might be a slightly different model and the funding might be questionable, but I do think it's imperative upon us to actually put forward the philosophical and the strategic viewpoint that how it's done at the moment is actually the right way to do it.
Thank you.
I'd echo those statements too. I think we're going to see some significant change to certain aspects of training. I suspect the basics will remain the same, an apprenticeship model. I think we're going to have to be innovative about the kinds of placements that are made available to registrars, because I think we're probably reaching saturation point for numbers of registrars. And I think that funding's going to be an area of huge change, but I suspect that's going to happen to general practice as a whole, as a profession as well.
I'm going to take a contrary view just to, or partly for the sake of it, but I think just maybe not 5 years, maybe 10 years. It'll be self-funded. We'll lose the apprenticeship model because the resources for the greater intake, the retiring cohort of GP supervisors, we don't have enough coming through, so the dynamics will change. It'll either be mega practice clinics that are trained 10 at a time, 20 at a time, like an American model with the residency programs, where you've got 20 residents or registrars running around a larger clinic. I think the dynamics of the political environment, the funding environment, and also our profession's demographics are going to force change in a way that is reluctant, where we're going to be reluctant. I don't think anyone here is really going, oh, that's awesome. But I'm struggling to see any of the alternative models that are being proposed. They're going to stop that tidal wave that's coming. So I think maybe not 5 years, but 10 years, we're going to have to be, more flux, but big time.
And Paul, if that is the case, if you see that as a potential future, how do you see ME's roles in that? How can we retain some of the art of healing that we do in these mega centres?
I hope they're not mega centres, but it may well be. I think the role of the medical educator, and I include supervisors with that, so we're all educating in it from a medical sense, will become even more important. It'll be probably more formalised and structured and less ad hoc, but we need to retain that one-to-one relationship with our learners, and we're going to have more of them, so there will have to be systems in place to support us as educators. But I think our role will be actually more important, otherwise the learner will get lost in the sea of crapness.
Do any of the panellists want to add their 2 bits to that thought or idea?
There's a number of other drivers that are coming in that are driving this change. We've talked about funding. The corporatisation of general practice, I think, is going to influence training, and that where a lot of people do training is in the GP-owned facility, that's changing. It's becoming more owned by corporate entities, and I think they'll become another part of the player in the whole training mix. Whether they'll become, I know there's been talk and fear about some of them becoming training entities. I hope that doesn't happen. However, if that does, we need good quality educators in there driving the education process there as well. The one thing that I think we have to make sure through this whole process, though, is that where the educator's role, I think it may shift to ensuring the quality of the supervisor's skill in providing that education. And I've seen that shift starting to happen over the last few years, and recognising that 70 to 80% of the learning is actually happening between the registrar, the supervisor and the patient, upping the ante in that space, but recognising the environment that that's happening may well change is something we need to be planning for.
Thank you, Graham. We might just go to Alison, thanks, to the original question.
Yeah, thank you. Probably not much more to say other than we know that there is going to be some change. It's just how we are adaptable and how we deal with that change. One thing I think is for sure is that we'll continue to have quality GP training. We have a look in the room and we talk about the expertise that we have and the fantastic groups of people that we have working across the RTO network. What I would say is, and there's obviously been some discussion here around RMN and that particular network, I'd like to add that more broadly across the RTO network, medical educators, administrative staff, program support people, our strength is in our numbers rather than individually. So there is very much a network out there that I think will play a role in terms of working together to ensure that we sustain a model that we will be all satisfied with, whatever happens.
Thank you so much, Alison. We might just open it up to the floor. We've only got a few minutes left. We've actually got about 15 minutes left. So, lovely Sarah Jane, are you happy to hand the mic around? Just put up your hand if you'd like to. Yep, just up the back there.
It's Peter Keppel. We heard the departmental representative yesterday talk about the National Rural Generalist model that's on his agenda. Perhaps now that we've had the Queensland model going for some time, I'd like to hear from the Queensland representative on the panel, whether he would like to tell us from the RTO point of view some of the lessons and opportunities, because it looks as though this might take off in other states as well.
So Queensland has had a rural generalist model for some time that's been driven by Queensland Health, with a couple of, one particular person, Dennis Lennox, who's a highly intelligent, highly motivated driver of the process that's banged his head against brick walls for many years. The model now has an intake of 80 students or junior doctors per year, and they select people very early on. They've had a focus and a drive to solve the rural procedural workforce problem, and they've been effective at doing that in that the number of rural anaesthetics, obstetrics and even surgery doctors in Queensland has dramatically increased, and many of the smaller hospitals that were having workforce problems, the situation's changing. One of the things that did drive that was that Queensland Health came to the party and pay these doctors very highly. And in doing so, that's produced a very high level of attraction to it. The problem they're now facing is that they're reaching saturation both in availability of the skills in those procedural disciplines, and they're looking at moving to the cognitive disciplines, your medicine, your mental health, your paediatrics, and the Indigenous health, so that they're getting those sort of skilled people out in the communities. A lot of those positions won't attract the same high-paid positions at the end because they won't be Queensland Health employees, they'll be employed within the general practice. Some of the lessons that Queensland does work differently in some ways, in that these people remain employees of Queensland Health, and there's been big challenges in a lot of the rural communities where the registrar numbers have been sucked up by the rural generalist, and there's been far fewer registrars available for the general practices in those communities, and the practices function quite separately from the hospital in many communities. So there's been challenges working around that. There's been challenges working with a program that has its own designs and goals that can be slightly different to what the RTO, but what we've found is that working with them, with very regular meetings and sharing of the experiences and the expectations, that we've been able to find a very effective way of moving forward with a lot of those challenges. And so now there's quite a high level of trust between the rural generalists and the RTOs within Queensland, with a problem-solving approach rather than a butting of heads. Where it will go within the rest of the country, I think you really need the RTO plus the rural generalist group plus the state health working together, and with the HHS or your hospital sectors being split within the state can make challenges. Fortunately, we still have an overarching agreement between regions that sometimes causes problems. So it's a matter of getting all the players around the table and mapping it out effectively.
Thank you, Graham. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, I've got a question. I would like to see what you would suggest as far as how you personally will be embracing the future in your roles currently.
My quick answer, and then I'll think about it, retirement.
My equally quick answer, unfortunately, is emigration, but that'll be a temporary blip.
Embracing people, embracing.
I've always disliked the questions like, give me a 5-year, 10-year plan. My long-term plan was to get up this morning, so I'm now running on whatever happens. And for me, it's a bit making sure that I and we maybe retain a bit of that sense of just curiosity and rather than overly plan, because you can't, we saw yesterday's plenary, your predictions of the future are going to be way off, even though those futurists who are apparently expert in predicting are way off a lot of the time, and they're correct a lot of the time. So it's a matter of not trying to pick which one's going to be right or wrong, but just being flexible with the things and rolling with the tide. And so I don't know what my answer is, but my approach hopefully will remain the same, just to roll with it.
I really like the concept of curiosity, and I think when we hear things about these new technologies and when we're overwhelmed by some of the futuristic ideas, remaining curious and I think flexible and embracing innovation as a way of how we can do our jobs better. So I think, curiosity is a good one. Go for it.
I think as a registrar who's hoping to become a medical educator in the future, I think a lot of the things I've learnt here about the future of new and interesting ways of teaching and learning are things I'm going to be hanging on to and hopefully putting into practice, and learning to be brave and put myself out there using the technologies that many people here have shown us, things like that Nicole's talked about, and I think that's been pretty inspirational, so I'd like to try and grab some of that and take that into my future.
Great, thank you.
One of the values that GPTT has that we work to is adaptability. And I think that no matter what the future looks like, we just need to be able to adapt to whatever that is and to whatever situation we as a group or as an individuals are faced with at any time. So that's, I think, a key.
Thank you. So retirement, curiosity, adaptability, immigration.
I will have my thought through answer now. As I've looked at what's happened to general practice and healthcare over the last 30, 40 years, and we've seen technology come in big ways in medicine, and one of the things that I saw being lost over the years was the art of healing. And for me, whatever happens in terms of the technology that comes through, all the big information, the big data that happens, I'll be working hard to make sure that that art of healing doesn't disappear from the role of the GP. Because I think if we lose that, we've lost our identity.
Thank you so much. One last comment before we go to our final question.
Well, firstly, Graham, well said. Very well said. Secondly, I think also as educators, what these last 2 or 3 days has reminded me about is the versatility that there is. It's not just about technology. There's a lot we can learn from technology and help technology, or for technology to help us develop. But I think the versatility of the different ways of supporting people and of educating people to become a healing general practitioner is what one of the big takeaway messages that I'll get from here.
Thank you. Just over the final question.
Thank you. Michael Fasher, Synergy, Western Sydney. I really love being part of this tribe and find it very inspiring. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you, Synergy. We haven't heard much about the move from volume to value. We haven't heard much about the growth of the patient-centred medical home, and we haven't heard much about the growth of effective teams. So if an old-fashioned time and management expert were to follow me around for the day, they'd find that at least a third of my time is spent doing stuff that other people could do. I think that teams will emerge so that doctors end up doing what only doctors can do, nurses end up doing what only nurses can do, and medical receptionists in Western Sydney are now being trained in TAFE as medical assistants. I think the ground is changing under our feet in fascinating ways which are going to benefit the joy of the practitioner and better care for the patient.
So just some comments from the panel about the concept of medical teams and where we're headed.
Certainly in the Territory, Michael, it's been our experience for a little while, PGPPP program beforehand and registrars now and throughout, of actually working in teams in communities, remote Aboriginal health communities particularly, but the value of having a medical practitioner work within a team and the opportunity that provides for them to reflect on their role, yes, their skill set, but also how that might contribute to a team. We've found that to be hugely valuable in building them as individuals. We've actually believed that it helps them to attain college assessment success, but that's a relatively small fry outcome. But just in terms of building them as individuals in the interests of healthcare, working in such teams and having a particular place in such a team without necessarily being the leader of it has been really developmental.
I'm just reflecting on, I had a chance to sit in a US clinic, that one I described, sort of a large clinic with 20-odd registrars running around and the doctors, and I sat in with the doctor for an afternoon, and the patient had been booked in, they'd been triaged by reception/nurse, then seen someone for preemptive counselling or something like that. Then someone else worked them up in terms of all the, basically a full physical type of thing, collated all the results. They got to the doctor, everything was basically there, then the patient arrives, there's a body as well as results, and I'm using that term deliberately. It was analysed, the doctor then worked out the treatment plan, and the patient then moved through the system to the physio and the nurse practitioner, and it was conveyor beltish, and the art of healing was not apparent at all, and that's where I fear. There's absolute value and necessity to us free to utilise teams, divulge those things we don't need to do. We're not qualified. We're overqualified for certain jobs, and we've got. I suppose the challenge is the balancing up of what we do well and retaining the opportunity to do that, and not being part of a cog of a wheel that you just lose all that, and we're just basically a referral to someone else rather than a healer.
Some of this will be what we choose, and as a profession, I fully believe teams are critical because the power of one is just one. When you bring a team together, you get multiplier effect, and being an effective member within a team, I think, is a skill that all of the new GPs coming through need. It's also going to be externally driven by the way that policymakers treat us. I think I've got the figures right. When I looked at the OECD data around number of doctors per head of population, the country that has the most is Greece, which surprised me. But the other thing that really surprised me is that Greece also has the lowest number of nurses per head of population within the OECD data. And so they've gone down this model that's very doctor-driven. And there are other countries at the far end. We're in the middle and moving up in terms of doctors' numbers, more so than nurses. And that's likely to change, I suspect, because of the sustainability. So there'll be systems factors that drive it. I think we need to be influencing because of the benefit of the community.
Thanks, Graham.
When I first came into general practice as a registrar, I was quite scared. I'd come from the hospital system and working in ED, and I was terrified of the idea that I'd be alone in a room and not have a team around me. I wonder if what's going to happen more in the future with larger practices and many GPs developing sort of sub-interests, whether we'll see more teamwork amongst groups of GPs working together, referring within a practice to colleagues for special interest components of it. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whether there's going to be de-skilling or increased skills amongst GPs, which mean we can avoid referring to other specialists. I don't know, but I wonder if that's the way it's going to go.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's interesting that the concept of being able to influence how we want to practice, and I really take away the fact that 1/3 of your time doing something that you think someone else could do, and how we can maximise, the skill sets of other team members. Just before we close this panel, I just wanted to allow probably one more question, because everyone's done very well. You've got 5 minutes if there's anyone else who'd like to make one more closing comment.
Apparently I've got a question. I asked John earlier if this question was on the panel, and he said no. But apparently it is now. My question was, what can, and this is not aimed at GP Synergy per se, but it can be useful for that, what can conference organisers do to optimise a conference experience for the organisations and the individuals attending? I actually put this on Facebook and we got massage, coffee, tattooists. It was all about convenience and nothing actually about the conference themselves, but I suppose that's it. And I suppose babysitting was the one thing I thought was really critical from that little mini Facebook list. But yeah, what can we do to optimise a conference?
I think that's really important for those organisers listening for next year. Don't forget you can put your answers down in your evaluation forms to change next year. But just our panel, what would you like to see more or less of?
The initial thing that comes to mind is, there was a session on this actually yesterday of setting learning objectives. When we sit down and think about we're going to run an event of some kind, the first question that we have to answer is, how do we want the people who come to this event to be different at the time they leave? What are we trying to achieve? And so when we're thinking about conference next year, or people who are organising conferences, have that discussion in your mind first. I think the discussion around this one was people being more aware of the future and thinking about the future, and I hope that that's something that's been achieved in the group as they leave. But that old learning objectives, what are you trying to achieve?
Thanks, Graham.
I want to see more registrars here. Here.
I think it's about, and partly what Graham said, but it's about meeting the needs of the people that are in the room. So importantly, it's about getting as much input in organising the event about what people want, about what they need, about who should be there, so that in the end it actually meets the needs of everyone who's there, and there's an expectation met.
I think for me, Paul, it's about facilitating the opportunity to share the ideas and to share the work that we all do back in our environments. And I think the breadth of different opportunities to present and share that in this conference has been outstanding. But I think that would be my underlying philosophy, is for everyone to feel they have the opportunity to showcase what they do, and therefore perhaps broadcasting what that might be significantly in advance so people can actually work towards it.
Can I answer my own question? While everyone was talking, I was just reflecting on my own question. I think one thing that conferences can do to optimise the experience is to ensure that the people that have spent time and effort in preparing content, whether it's a workshop, whether it's a paper, whether it's just a concept idea, facilitating that message reaching the audience. And so not upskilling, but improving the skills of the presentation skills. I really liked the Pecha Kucha, Wise, what was the other one? There was the pitch. They're non-formal formats that allowed a dialogue. And that dialogue meant the audience, the message was received. And I think if we can make sure that, the ideal is every session, every speaker, their message is received, whether it's agreed upon or not, doesn't matter, it's received rather than just lost in the mix of things. I think if we can improve the presentation a few more steps forward, we have a much more valuable conference, because the content's there, it's just a matter of whether it hits the audience.
So we'd love to hear from you as well. So please put your comments in your evaluation forms. Let's just say a huge thank you to our panel for being brave to be up here. Great, thank you. We're allowed to go.
Well, that was fabulous. So just while they're de-staging, I'd just like to echo one of the sentiments that came out in the panel of just what a wonderful community or tribe or family this is. How wonderful it is to get together every year with like-minded people. You all bring such excitement and energy to these meetings, and the passion for learning through fun and exploration is just sensational. These are always the best conferences, in the calendar year, and it's not so much about the presentations, it's about the energy of the people that come to these things. So I would just like you all to give yourselves and your colleagues a big round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.